Reports suggest that on January 29, 2026, at just after 3 in the morning, something unprecedented happened. A high-ranking American defense official received an urgent call from Brussels. The voice on the other end belonged to NATO's Secretary General, Mark Rutte. And what he said next has never happened in the history of the Atlantic Alliance. According to sources familiar with the conversation, Rutte delivered a shocking ultimatum. European leaders had just finished an emergency meeting, and they reached a decision that could change everything. The United States allegedly has 72 hours to begin pulling its military presence out of Europe or risk being removed from NATO entirely. Now, you might be asking, is this actually happening? Well, information reaching certain defense circles suggests this is very real, and it's unfolding right now as you watch this video. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because what you're about to hear is not being discussed in mainstream media yet. And understanding what happens in the next few hours could change how you see America's place in the world forever. So, how did we get here? Let me walk you through what analysts believe has been building over the past 2 weeks, because this didn't just happen overnight. It reportedly started around January 15, 2026. Sources indicate that President Trump sent a formal message to the government of Denmark. The content? An offer to purchase Greenland. But here's where it gets interesting. The proposal allegedly included a 10-day deadline and a warning of severe economic consequences if Denmark refused. Some reports suggest there was no actual payment offered, just a cancellation of what the administration called a defense debt, a debt that, according to European officials, doesn't actually exist in any recognized form. Then, just a few days later, on January 18th, something happened that reportedly caused immediate tension across Europe. During a media interview, President Trump allegedly made comments suggesting that NATO allies didn't contribute equally during the war in Afghanistan, that American forces carried most of the burden while others, in his words, held back. The reaction in London, Berlin, and other capitals was said to be swift and angry, but it didn't stop there. On that same day, reports emerged that Trump had ordered significant cuts to the American military budget for Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Over 100 personnel were allegedly given notice to withdraw within 30 days. And according to sources, Germany was never consulted. NATO command wasn't informed in advance. It just happened. Now we move to January 21st. This is where analysts say the situation became truly dangerous. Intelligence sources suggest that Poland quietly circulated a confidential document to all European Union member states. The subject reportedly involved activating a rarely used mutual defense clause. Not NATO's famous Article 5, but a European Union provision that works without American involvement. For the first time in decades, a major European nation was allegedly exploring whether Europe needs to be ready to defend itself completely independently of the United States. 3 days later, on January 24th, something remarkable reportedly occurred in the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron met privately. What happened in that meeting allegedly leaked within 48 hours. And according to those reports, Starmer made an extraordinary offer. If the United States moved to punish Denmark over Greenland, Britain would reportedly consider withdrawing from the Five Eyes intelligence alliance. That's the intelligence sharing agreement between the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand that has existed since World War II. In exchange, sources suggest Britain would join a new European intelligence framework, sharing secrets with Brussels instead of Washington. Think about that for a moment. Britain choosing Europe over America on intelligence matters. That would have been unthinkable just months ago. Then came January 28th. Late in the evening, Brussels time, sources indicate that NATO's governing council held an emergency session. 30 member nations were represented, but according to information from inside the meeting, 29 delegations were in the room. The United States was not invited. What happened over the next several hours may be studied for generations. According to reports filtering out of Brussels, 28 nations voted in favor of a dramatic resolution, a suspension of United States voting rights pending what they called called a compliance review. Only two nations allegedly voted against it, Turkey and Hungary. The legal justification reportedly centers on Article 13 of the NATO treaty, a provision that has never been used in 77 years. It allows member states to suspend any nation that violates democratic principles or peaceful dispute resolution commitments. And the accusation against the United States? Analysts say it focuses on President Trump's alleged threats of military action against Denmark, a NATO ally. European lawyers argue this violates the treaty's core principle that conflicts must be resolved peacefully. At 3:14 in the morning Eastern Time, that phone call allegedly happened. 72 hours to comply or face expulsion. That deadline, according to sources, expires in just hours from now. Now, you might be thinking, America is too powerful to be kicked out. We have nuclear weapons. We have 100,000 troops in Europe, the largest economy on Earth. They can't just remove us. But intelligence sources suggest Europe has been preparing for exactly this scenario. And they've reportedly built a four-stage plan to do something no one thought possible: remove a superpower from the alliance. Let me explain how sources say this would actually work. Stage one is the legal foundation, and according to reports, this stage is already complete. European legal experts at NATO have allegedly built a detailed case. They cite Trump's public statements about Greenland as violating peaceful dispute resolution. They point to unilateral decisions on military bases as breaking consultation requirements. The legal structure is reportedly already in place. Stage two involves diplomatic isolation, and this is allegedly happening right now. I've seen reports of upcoming meetings where, for the first time in decades, the United States is not invited. The Munich Security Conference, one of the most important defense gatherings in the world, reportedly won't include American officials in key sessions. European defense ministers are said to be planning closed-door meetings about what they're calling post-NATO security structures. Britain, France, and Germany are allegedly scheduling a summit to discuss something called a European nuclear umbrella. That's the phrase used to describe replacing America's nuclear protection that has defended Europe since 1949. The diplomatic architecture that kept America at the center of everything is allegedly being quietly dismantled. Stage three is economic pressure, and this is where sources say things get truly serious. Reports suggest the European Union has prepared a comprehensive sanctions package. It's allegedly ready to deploy the moment the 72-hour window closes. What's in this package? According to information reaching financial analysts, it could include massive tariffs on American technology exports, restrictions on European banks lending to American corporations, and potentially freezing trillions of dollars in American assets held within European financial systems. If even half of these measures were activated, experts believe the economic consequences would be catastrophic. The dollar could lose significant value within days. Inflation could spike dramatically. We're talking about economic damage on a scale that would rival the worst financial crises in history. Stage four is military expulsion. This is the scenario that defense experts say keeps Pentagon officials awake at night. According to Article 13, if a member is formally suspended from NATO, they lose treaty protections. That means American bases on European soil could legally be reclaimed by host nations, and reports suggest there's already a plan for this. Documents allegedly leaked from European defense ministries outline how this would happen. Germany could nationalize Ramstein Air Base. Turkey could close Incirlik, which houses American nuclear weapons. Poland could seize billions of dollars worth of military equipment stockpiles. Sources indicate European military units have been quietly repositioned near American bases over the past 2 weeks. If the deadline passes without resolution, the process could begin immediately. But here's what should really concern you. It's not just about losing bases or even losing the alliance. It's about what happens the day after, because Beijing is watching and they're calculating. Right now, the United States maintains what military strategists call a two-theater capability. We can fight in Europe and Asia at the same time. That depends on having forces already positioned in both regions. But if NATO collapses, if we lose European bases, we have to make a choice: defend Europe or defend Asia. We can't do do both. Defense analysts are reportedly running scenarios right now. If America is expelled from NATO, a massive portion of naval forces currently in the Atlantic would need to redeploy to the Pacific to maintain credibility against China. But that redeployment takes months. And during those months, the United States would be vulnerable in both regions simultaneously. I've seen references to a recent analysis produced for the Department of Defense. The conclusion reportedly estimates that if NATO dissolves, the United States may not have sufficient forces to defend Taiwan from a Chinese invasion. The report allegedly moves China's window to act from 2030 to 2027, 3 years earlier. And there's more. The European Union recently signed a trade agreement with India that includes a neutrality clause, meaning if China attacks Taiwan and America calls for allied support, Europe could refuse, citing neutrality. Japan and South Korea, who depend on American protection, would panic. And Beijing knows this. They know NATO's collapse creates a window where America is strategically paralyzed. Then there's the nuclear question. Right now, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Turkey host American nuclear weapons under NATO arrangements. If the U.S. is expelled, those weapons have to leave immediately. But Europe doesn't have its own nuclear deterrent. Only France and the UK have independent arsenals. So what happens to countries like Germany and Poland, who have depended on American nuclear protection for 77 years? Reports indicate France has proposed extending its nuclear umbrella to all EU members. But there's a condition. Other nations must fund France's nuclear program going forward. The cost is reportedly estimated at 120 billion euros annually. Germany's response, delivered through back channels, was allegedly a flat refusal. They called it fiscal blackmail. And that refusal creates a vacuum, a security gap. And who's perfectly positioned to exploit it? Russia. Do you see how this unfolds? America loses NATO. Europe loses its nuclear umbrella. Germany refuses to pay France. Eastern Europe panics. And Moscow, which has been waiting for exactly this moment, could begin testing the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Without American forces, without a credible nuclear deterrent, without Article 5, those countries would be vulnerable. Now, the White House knows all of this. They've seen the assessments. And sources suggest President Trump has 3 options on his desk right now, and every single one carries enormous risk. Option 1, preemptive withdrawal. According to sources close to the administration, Trump is considering withdrawing from NATO before he can be expelled. The logic is that he controls the narrative. He can frame it as America leaving because Europe won't pay its fair share. The executive order is reportedly already drafted. But if he does this, financial experts believe the consequences would be immediate and devastating. Stock markets could collapse. The dollar could lose massive value. Inflation could spike to levels not seen in generations. Self-inflicted economic catastrophe. Option 2, economic warfare. Reports suggest the Treasury Department has prepared a retaliatory sanctions package, massive tariffs on European goods, freezing European assets in American banks, attempting to cut Europe off from financial systems the U.S. partially controls. The goal would be to make Europe hurt so badly they beg for reconciliation. But there's a fatal flaw. This only works if America isn't isolated. If we still have allies who'll join the sanctions. But China, India, and Southeast Asian nations have all signed trade agreements with the EU in recent weeks. They're not going to side with Washington, which means if Trump launches this economic war, American exporters lose access to the world's largest consumer market, and we end up sanctioning ourselves. Option 3, military standoff. This is the scenario that genuinely worries defense experts. According to sources, Trump is considering an unprecedented order. He could instruct the 100,000 American troops currently in Europe not to withdraw. He could declare U.S. bases on European soil to be sovereign American territory, and any attempt to seize them would be considered an act of war. Reports suggest Europe has already prepared a response. If American forces refuse to leave, Germany and Poland would allegedly surround U.S. bases with their own military units, cut off utilities, cut off supplies, create a humanitarian crisis that forces Washington to back down. But here's the nightmare. What if one nervous soldier on either side fires a shot? What if a confrontation escalates into an exchange of fire? At that point, you'd have American and European troops shooting at each other for the first time in history. So which option will Trump choose? I spoke to a former national security official who has knowledge of White House discussions, and they told me something chilling. Trump reportedly doesn't believe this is real. He thinks Europe is bluffing. He thinks when the deadline expires, Brussels will back down, because in his view, no one would actually dare to expel the United States from NATO. But sources across multiple European capitals suggest they're not bluffing. They've spent months preparing for this exact moment. They've built the financial, military, and diplomatic structures to function without America. And that vote to suspend U.S. participation wasn't close. It was 28-2. This isn't a few nations acting emotionally. This is allegedly the collective will of the entire alliance. Now, I've received information suggesting something even more significant. The Joint Chiefs of Staff reportedly sent a classified message to President Trump last night. The message was direct: do not retaliate. America's military leadership is allegedly telling the commander-in-chief that if he chooses any of the three options, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for foreign policy, but for the republic itself. Economic retaliation would collapse the economy. Military confrontation would trigger what some are calling a NATO civil war. Preemptive withdrawal would destroy American credibility for a generation. And here's what should truly shake you. According to sources, a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs personally contacted Mark Rutte in Brussels days ago. The message was allegedly simple: give us 90 days. We'll handle Trump internally. The implication is clear. The American military establishment is reportedly considering options to address the president, not through impeachment, not through election, but potentially through constitutional provisions for removing a president unable to discharge their duties. 4 members of the cabinet have allegedly held private discussions with Vice President J.D. Vance about this possibility. The question: if Trump orders a military response against Europe, does that constitute grounds for removal? No one knows. There's no precedent. But sources say the conversations are happening right now. Let me bring this together. 14 days ago, this reportedly began with comments about Afghanistan. It escalated with proposals about Greenland. And now, just hours before the deadline, we're allegedly facing the collapse of the Atlantic Alliance, the potential constitutional crisis over a sitting president, and a global power vacuum that China is positioned to fill immediately. So I'm going to ask you directly, do you think the United States should remain in NATO at any cost? Or is Europe justified in taking action against a president who allegedly threatens force against allies? Or is the real answer that both sides are wrong and we're watching the end of the Western world as we've known it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every single one. Here's what you need to do right now. Subscribe immediately, because everything could change in the next few hours, and I'll bring you the analysis first. Hit the notification bell. I'm planning live coverage at 3 a.m. Eastern Time to track the deadline in real time. You don't want to miss this. Share this video with anyone who thinks NATO is stable. They need to see what's reportedly happening behind closed doors. The Atlantic Alliance is burning. The question is, will America burn with it? I'll see you at 3 a.m.